somebody told me this. He said, with atheists, most atheists, they have an emotional reason why they don't believe in God. But the logical side is a barrier that like a shield that they're holding in front of them. You have to like chip down at that in order to reach into the real reason why they don't believe in God. So all of these logical arguments are hiding something else. But with these Fitrahi arguments, it's hitting at the logical side and the emotional side as well. So that's why I think these are the best arguments.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Incisive Thoughts. And today I have something very, very special for you all. Today we have a guest, as Petrit Kola. Some of you might already know him. He is a researcher, a thinker working at the intersection of philosophy, theology, and Islamic thought. He completed an award-winning master's dissertation on the problem of evil, and his work engages critically with atheism, moral realism, and arguments for the existence of God. It's a pleasure to have with us Brother Petrit Kola.
The pleasure is all mine being here. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much for having me.
First topic that I want to discuss is arguments for God's existence. So my first question to you would be, which argument for God's existence do you think is the best according to you, and why?
Yeah, so there are a lot of arguments for the existence of God, and intuitively, I take somewhat of the Ibn Taymiyyah approach in the sense that, generally speaking, we are all born with understanding that there is a God, and that God is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Ibn Taymiyyah says, and hadith from Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we're all born with a fitrah. So intuitively, we all have this intuition of God. However, when it comes to the arguments for God's existence, which we try posing to the atheists to try to convince them, or Muslims have shubuhat, I think that the best argument, or the most foundational argument, is the contingency argument, which essentially shows that everything in this universe is contingent, i.e. it depends on something else to explain itself, and there needs to be something necessary through the principle of sufficient reason, which is a very intuitive, and many people uphold this as well, that, if I were just to walk into a room and I see a banana, I would ask, well, who put the banana in the room? Why is there a banana in the room? That question needs an answer outside of me just pointing at the banana. Whether that's 10 bananas, one, or an infinite amount of bananas, there still needs an explanation as to why the bananas are there. Hence, I think the contingency argument is the best foundational argument to get somebody close to the belief in God.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah. So one thing that you mentioned, apart from the contingency argument, I found really interesting is that you said that people intuitively believe in God or something along those lines, which is the Taymiyyah approach. So what exactly that is? Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, Ibn Taymiyyah, because this was historically, many people such as, prior to Ibn Taymiyyah, Ghazali, especially Razi, and many other people, they tried arguing that in order to have, let's say, the belief in God, this is famous from Ghazali. He says, well, I was born into a Muslim household, but there's a Christian who was born in a Christian household, or a Jew born in a Jewish household. So they believe their own God. So in order to really believe in a God, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to logically get there through deductive reasoning. However, Ibn Taymiyyah takes a different approach in that he says, well, we're all born with the fitrah, as per the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So what he's saying is that God is intuitive in all of us. And interestingly, and I remember that Sabur Ahmed, I think, interviewed this individual who wrote the book Born Believers. I don't know if you know that book or if you've read it, but what's interesting about that book is he's interviewing different places and showing that people are born believing, born believers, in that there is a single creator. Something else created us. So the Ibn Taymiyyah view is we start with the belief in God. It's abductive. Then we go out. Does God make sense in terms of the reality of the world? Since we're all born with the Fitrah, this innate disposition to believe in God, that's kind of the Ibn Taymiyyah approach, which means when discussing these issues, I start with the foundation that Allah exists. Then I go downward to see what arguments would best prove that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. That is actually one of my favorite position as well, is starting from the Fitrahi aspect and explaining to people how, like, this is the natural disposition that we have as human beings. It's something intuitive, natural, untaught in some sense, and even universal in some sense. Even interestingly, I had Dr. Justin Barrett on my channel twice, and there are some very interesting discussions, like, exchange we had. He in fact also admitted that even if you keep a group of children on a desert island, they are very likely to come up with the concept of God. So that's kind of fascinating to see that there is this capacitor, this kind of drive that makes us, like, believe in God, which is really fascinating. Now, I think the most important. Sorry.
No, that was like kind of the interesting story of, if you look at Salman al-Farsi, when he was far away from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from the proper religion, but it's through the fitrah that he has an innate disposition to believe in one God that slowly led him to the prophets. So of course, I just wanted to add that.
Subhanallah. Yeah. Now maybe we can segue into one of the most interesting things, for me at least, is reviewing many different arguments for God's existence. And we're going to do this with something that is quite trending, which is we're going to try to rate them with the tier list, inshallah. So we have a couple of arguments, and inshallah we're going to see which argument ranks where from S, A, B, C, D. And maybe we can start with, let me see what I can start with. Let's start with the argument from beauty. And can you see me moving the screen?
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay. So now this is mostly going to be your perspective. Maybe I can add a bit here and there if I can. So what is your view on the argument from beauty? Very, very briefly, and where should we place it in this list?
Well, I find the argument from beauty does connect a lot with the Fitrah and the Quran, in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us repeatedly to look at what Allah created. Is there any contradiction in the world? Is there anything mistake in Allah's creation? So this connects a lot with the Fitrah argument, that you look into the world, you see how beautiful the world is, how everything is so majestic, then how could it not be from a God? In the same sense that, you read a really good book, you wouldn't believe it just came from a bunch of random pages taken left and right. It has to be a very specific author who knows how to write a book in order to produce that beautiful book. So in terms of the argument from beauty, I would rank it, let's say probably B, because obviously an atheist can just point to the problem of evil, and you have to go down and argue against the problem of evil. So just because of, depending on who you're talking with, I would say for the general masses, this is a very good argument, and the Fitrahi argument. And obviously, if you're getting more into the academics, then you might have an atheist who goes like, well, the problem of evil, divine hiddenness, then you have to debate that then.
Right, I think that makes sense. So yeah, beauty we have on B. Let's start with a very popular argument known as the Kalam Cosmological Argument. Where do you think I should place this argument?
I think you should place this argument on A. And I remember, who was it? I think it was Alex O'Connor and Joe Schmidt. They gave it like a C ranking or something, I don't remember. But even Ibn Taymiyyah likes this argument, which, just for people who don't know, the argument is essentially, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And the benefit of this argument is that it's so simple. I've seen Muslim Lantern, I've seen many other people use this argument, and the general population just connects to this argument. Like, it just simply makes sense. And unless you want to be an ultra skeptic, where you deny the first premise, which many don't want to do, the main objection then comes from the second premise, because many atheists will try to argue that the universe always existed. There was never a beginning to create, a beginning of time. It was simply always existing. And that you have to delve into more science and look at whether the universe did have a beginning, the Big Bang, try to disprove infinity. And that's why if you're dealing with an academic atheist, you have to have those in the back of your mind, if that makes sense. That's the only reason why it's not S tier for me.
Right. Yeah, I think the, like, on a philosophical level, sometimes it becomes really jargony, and it takes a lot of time to even make a case for why did the universe have a beginning. But if you are speaking to a normal person, it is very intuitive for him at times, or at least some people confirm, for at least from the scientific lens, even though that is also not conclusive, but confirm that yes, the universe had a beginning, and then it becomes easier to present this argument, right?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that generally people will accept that, but just because of that one step, just because you'll have that stringent atheist who wants to deny it, you just have to have a little bit more extra steps for it. But as Ibn Taymiyyah says, this is probably the easiest argument, and he even favors this over the contingency argument, just because of how simple it is to explain to people. That's why William Lane Craig got so famous. He took from Ghazali. His entire thing was taken from Ghazali, so.
Right. Okay. So now we'll have some very interesting argument, and this has, okay, of course, all of these arguments have many different formulations and many different versions. All of these are like family of arguments, not one particular argument. So this, another one would be the argument from reason. This is also a family of arguments. What do you think about this argument, and where should we place this argument?
Is this the C.S. Lewis kind of one, that naturalism is self-defeating?
Yeah.
Or which one are you saying?
Yeah, maybe. So argument from reason, we can take the C.S. Lewis version as well, or for example, Max Baker Hitch formulates a more robust version, like, or for example, if you see in Hamza's book also, Divine Reality, you have one particular version. So they all of, like, it's a family of arguments, and you see all of them having something similar within them, which is trying to, sometimes it's more of an internal critique for it is atheism, or sometimes it is explaining how theism can account for reason, whereas many of the other views fail in accounting for reliable rational cognitive faculties.
Yeah, I like the argument from reason. That's why I was asking this for clarification. I would place it in B. Like, I do like the argument from reason, especially since what you're trying to show is that the only other explanation, like naturalism, which is what Graham Oppy takes for granted, like he's a naturalist, and only for this natural world. If you can show that it's weak, there's a contradiction, there are issues with naturalism, then it leads to an individual pointing towards the only other possibility, which is non-naturalism, which could lead somebody easier to God. Hence, that's why I think it was Philip Goff, who was an atheist, but then became a Christian due to, let's say, consciousness cannot be explained through naturalism or through materialism. So the family of these types of arguments, once again, they can be also seen as Fitrah, shows why naturalism does not work, and it can help lead somebody towards a belief in God.
Subhanallah. Okay, so let's move on to the next argument. Let me see. You wanna pick up any? Can you see, or should I pick up?
Yeah. I actually want to look at the consciousness argument.
Oh wow. Yeah, sure. Okay, let's pick this.
Because I would. I'm leaning towards S. This is my.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
I think
you make the choice here.
It was.
Yeah.
Put it on S tier. I actually really like this argument.
Wow.
I remember you were. I think it was you who talked with Joshua Rasmussen, and he said that on your podcast that if you take materialism or naturalism to explain consciousness, it's worse than a contradiction. And when I tell people this, I remember I was even talking to like some atheists. When I tell them that, they kind of like try to argue against me. But I remember one time I was debating an atheist, and I used the consciousness argument. And I was trying to tell him that, we're just a bunch of random atoms. Like, why is it that the shirt that I'm wearing, this thobe, it doesn't feel pain? Yet my brain, yet I feel pain. I feel sadness. And he's like, oh, but maybe emergence. I said, well, emergence doesn't really explain it still. And then I said, okay, let's just take two possibilities. You have just science, just through a physical world explaining consciousness through just somehow we have physical parts that have no sensibility to us having sensibility. You can either explain it through the Big Bang, or you explain that the necessary being has consciousness. And he stood there, he says, yeah, that's true, but, then he switched to the problem of evil. He couldn't give a proper answer there. And I see the only thing that, because I look at the other solutions. I know Philip Goff takes panpsychism, that all the atoms are conscious. And that view goes totally against Occam's razor, totally against simplicity. Why would we favor that somehow all the atoms are conscious? Yet if they connect with a human being, we have consciousness, but other things don't. It's still a lot of things not explained. Then we have, I think, David Chalmers, which is there's a physical realm and the conscious realm. Once again, you're positing more things that there's no evidence for. It's a complexity against a simpler answer. So, and then the only other one is emergence, which basically, for those who don't know, is let's say I have a brick. The brick, that in and of itself, does not have the attribute or the property of, a big red house, But if I had a bunch of bricks, it emerges a big bricked red house, right? And the problem with that is that, let's look at the brick analogy. While it is true that bricks in and of themselves do not have the property of big red house, a big bricked red house, when you look at the whole, I can still make reference to the parts to the whole. I still say it's a big bricked red house. When I look at the parts, it's red bricks. So I can make reference to the parts to the whole. But when it comes to consciousness, I can't make the same reference of part consciousness, parts like non-sense part to whole that is sense. It's not the same thing. Do you get the point I'm trying to make here? Then you can't make reference to the part when talking about the whole of consciousness. Hence, the only really possible solution is through a necessary being who has a will.
Subhanallah. Yeah, I also really love this argument. One thing is that this actually sometimes you just allow people to just reflect down or within themselves that there is an entire there is an entire kingdom within themselves of their own mind, where there are thoughts, there is mental causation, there is intentionality, aboutness of something, and all of that you cannot just reduce down to material reality. I think it was Joshua Rasmussen was mentioning in some other podcast that even when he's presenting arguments, compare the contingency argument compared to the argument from consciousness, he finds the argument from consciousness actually more effective on people, because when he makes people realize or think about their own being, their own self, their own identity, like their own what is it, and this can sometimes trigger the Fitrah in a way where other arguments fail to do so, because it's the most apparent thing to you, which is your own self, which is your own consciousness in a sense. And if you think about that and you can't find an explanation for that, of course that has to at least in the very least sense, at least for you to question your paradigm if you cannot account for it in some way. So yeah, I believe this argument is
and to add to your point, I remember Joshua Rasmussen, he says something about consciousness. I forgot which book it was, but it was a recent book, I think. And he was saying that consciousness is the most known thing, yet the most mysterious thing. Everyone knows that we have consciousness, yet we don't know how to explain it. And I know Hamzat sources he uses when he debates sometimes atheists. He says, you guys don't even have the right to debate or even think. The only way you're thinking is through a God. It's an interesting argument. It hits the Fitrah exactly.
Subhanallah. Yeah. Okay. So let's move to the next argument, and we can start with, this one, the design argument. Now, this design is more like the not fine tuning, but other forms of design.
Yeah, I think this would go with to the A tier as well.
Okay.
I feel that a lot of these, I feel like a lot of like the design and the cosmological argument, they, even though they're put in a way that's very academic sometimes, they hit at the Fitrah. It goes back towards the Fitrah. And what's amazing with these arguments, because once again, we have to know the best arguments are found in the Quran. Even though we put these wordings with them, the best ones like the Kalam, conscious, even design argument, they're all found within the Quran. And what's beautiful about these is that not only are they logical, like you're hitting the atheist who wants his logical deductive arguments, but you're also hitting them emotionally in the Fitrah, where they're stuck in a position where, okay, like, yeah, everything is designed well, but maybe it's just random, or maybe the multiverse. And when a Muslim who has doubts hears the atheist say that, they go like, yeah, like why would I be an atheist? Why would I accept the multiverse or the Big Bang when clearly it seems like the work of God? So this argument does two things, the Fitrah and a logical hitting against the atheist, which somebody told me this. He said, with atheists, most atheists, they have an emotional reason why they don't believe in God. But the logical side is a barrier that like a shield that they're holding in front of them. You have to like chip down at that in order to reach into the real reason why they don't believe in God. And the analogy is true, even when in the Quran, when Shaitan went against Allah for not bowing down to Adam, he said, well, you created me from fire and you created him from clay. Like, I'm better than him. And then Allah quickly says, you just have kibr. You have pride. So all of these logical arguments are hiding something else. But with these Fitrahi arguments, it's hitting at the logical side and the emotional side as well. So that's why I think these are the best arguments.
Subhanallah, yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so now we move into, let's take something very abstract. Something very, people who generally don't like this argument is known as the ontological argument.
I don't use
Maybe
I rank at C. What do you think, actually? Actually, what do you think? Because you
I would rank
use it.
I would rank it D because I think when people generally people when they are not well versed with the kind of how it's constructed, they just seem that this is like you're in some sense okay, kind of trying to delude people into believing in God, and this some people consider it to be a very very bad argument, though it's not that bad. At least in some sense it makes theism reasonable, as Alvin Plantinga says, but it's not that if you are talking to an atheist and this argument would be like it's eureka moment and it's going to be like, oh yeah, now I believe.
No,
that's never going to happen. So yeah, cease fine.
Just for the
can you explain this argument for those?
Yeah, so those who don't know the ontological argument, it's like you're just sitting down and you're thinking, what is the most beautiful, best thing that exists? And whatever that thing is God, basically. Like you're just sitting and thinking about it. And I remember Alex O'Connor says he likes his arguments because it's cool. Like you're just sitting down and thinking, and you think God exists. But the weird thing with this argument was when this argument was made, it wasn't actually created as an argument. It was just simply written in an own book, and it wasn't trying to be an argument. People later took it as an argument. But I understand the idea that God exists in the back of our mind, like it's through the Fitrah. But this is taken from a different perspective, and that's why I never really use this argument, to be honest.
Same. Okay. Now let's take another version of this argument, which is becoming a bit popular, which is the modal ontological argument. So where do you place this?
I like this one more, but I would place it B.
Okay. And can you unpack what's different in this argument?
Well, okay, when it comes to what's modal, like modal operators, S5 modal logic, it's dealing with possibilities and like wajibat, necessary things. So if I say that, like if I were to say P, it is possible that P, therefore it is necessary that P is possible, stuff like that. And the modal ontological argument is just using these modal operators of possibility and necessity, just using those to lean into that God exists. And Joshua Rasmussen is one that discusses this one too a lot of times. If you read some of his papers, he mentions this. I like this argument. It's just that you can't use it for the general masses, let's say. Like if I'm going, let's say I'm going to debate, let's say somebody debates an atheist, and there's going to be Muslims, non-Muslims. Outside like the 2% that knows these academic terms, it kind of gets lost in the sauce and only like some people understand it. I like the intuition behind it. And I like using those operators. But personally, because it's more complex for a general audience and it's moving away from some of the Fitrah arguments, I don't really use it as much. What do you think?
Yeah, I think what you said was exactly on point, because like if someone is not well versed with the entire literature of how S5 like logic works and stuff like that, first I'll have to explain all of that to them. I have to do all this extra work, and then maybe I can even the argument can be something that at least they would understand and try to see how it works. But before that, they won't be able
Exactly.
to judge the consistency of the argument itself. So yeah, I agree, and it's at least better than the ontological argument. So yeah, we can. B is fine.
Oh, I agree. It's better than the ontological argument.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's. Now I'm thinking maybe I should have added more arguments, but it's fine. So let's take the Fitrah itself as an argument. Now I just
As
wrote the
dear.
word Fitrah, but of course, but yeah, this could be many different ways of presenting this argument. I think. How would you present the Fitrah argument?
Well, so I've actually tried presenting the Fitrah argument. The way that I present it is like, you know, when we really look at human history, people have generally had this intuition that God exists. And while there is difference of opinions on what that God is, it still goes back to the intuition that it seems like people intuitively believe that there's a God. And really and what I like about this argument is that the best way to point to God being the fitrah is that it leads somebody to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we have the hadith from Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We have the scholars dealing with what the fitrah is, such as somebody can say, yeah, God is intuitive, but the question is, well, why is God intuitive? And the reason why is because Allah, God, put this fitrah within all of us. Hence why we have concepts of morality, let's say, or whatever the case may be. That's why I like the fitrah argument. You can take it in a logical way, show the book-born believer, show the evidence, show history, even talking to the atheists. Like, people generally have this intuition that God exists. And, even if you take Ibn Taymiyyah, like we are justified with our intuition. Michael Humer discusses as well, that on prima facie value, we're justified with our intuition. I would place it on S tiers. Works on all fronts, in my opinion.
Subhanallah. Yeah, and I think this is something where no much more attention can be given to this argument, and not many people actually take this very seriously. Is that, of course, if all of humanity, if every civilization, every culture, like I've been working with brother Jerry Coughlin, and his research is related to like different tribes in the world and different cultures in the world. And what's fascinating is that we've never found any entire civilization or entire a full tribe or community that was completely atheistic. We have never seen that. So that's quite fascinating. There were acquisitions made, but if you dig more deeper, like for example the Piraha and the Andamanis, they actually have a concept of God, or they have a concept of a creator, something along those lines. So it's never there, like that like it's kind of fascinating that all of human history, people have believed in it. And cognitive scientists, they say that even if you are on a desert island, you are still likely to believe in a god. Like, Paul Bloom was asked one question. The question was like, if AI robots started like, in some sense taking care of babies, and there's no human interaction at all. Now they're just AI robots and a group of infants, and then they grow. Will they, and the robot never actually indoctrinates anything related to religion, will they ever have a concept of God? And Paul Bloom said, yeah. I mean, he said that yes, they still would likely generate a belief in. So that's kind of really fascinating. And when it comes to naturalistic explanations, like I've heard Dr. Justin Barrett himself say, now this is maybe not the formulation of the Fitrah argument, but again, suggestively, he says that, when you look at compare naturalism and theism, if naturalism, like, even if it tries to account for why do we have this belief, it's still very much unexpected in this naturalistic worldview, where beings out of the blue, like accidental byproducts of nature, they start having a belief in God, and they're obsessed with this concept, and all of their civilization always have this kind of natural inclination, compared to theism, which can expect or does expect this to have people to have this. So this can in some sense be generated as an evidential challenge for naturalism. Like, why do people have this in the first place? You might come up with an ad hoc explanation, but comparatively what theism has to offer is more simple and comprehensive.
Yeah, and what's good about this argument, Ibn Taymiyyah discusses as well, is that, Ibn Taymiyyah holds this view that if you deny God, then you already fall into skepticism. And what Ibn Taymiyyah says is that you have to start with God, that God is ilm daruri. Ilm daruri is not a priori. It means it's necessary knowledge to do other forms of knowledge. And once you deny that, then all your other, epistemological understandings fall apart. And what I'm trying to say is, and what Ibn Taymiyyah argues, is that if we just start with God, an abductive way of reasoning, and then you just see how everything would flow through. You start with God. Can it explain the beginning of the universe? Yes. Can it explain how I came here? Yes. Can it explain, evolution through animals? Yes. Then it can lead to somebody, okay, it simply makes sense. And it hits at the heart, at the fitrah as well. So it's both a logical, but also an emotional argument as well at the same time. That's why it's clear S tier.
Subhanallah. And yeah, this also reminds me one more important fact is that, like, even if you want to reason, let's say, or live like a normal normal human being, we have to take some things as a given. For instance, some aspect of moral understanding is intuitive. We accept that as the default. We understand that our cognitive faculties are reliable in some sense. We take it as the default. The real world being real, we take it as the default. Now, these things are something that are automatically delivered to us by our cognitive system rather than we learn them, like the reality of the past itself. Now, if the intuition of a belief in a god, or like, let's say, a creator, like when we look at the nature, we see that it is created, and then we see teleology in nature. If that itself fits within that category, and then if I am accepting all of the other defaults of which are automatically delivered, but just being skeptical about one, then of course this leads to some kind of selective skepticism where your epistemology
exactly
is in some sense not consistent. You're not being consistent there. Is that what you're hinting at? Yeah,
that's exactly what, and I'm 100% agreeing with you that, if you were to look at atheism, somebody who disbelieves in God, and this is an idea video that I'm trying to come across as well, is that you will see that they are bound to reject something that is intuitive, that is just so apparently obvious. You'll find atheists like Alex Malpass. I remember he had a debate with Jake and Abdullah as well in Thought Adventure podcast. He was trying to doubt the principle of sufficient reason, that everything here has a reason for why it's here, why it's one way over the other. And you could see that it was very, how would you phrase it? It was just simply denying the truth of how things are, how we intuitively see things. Whenever we see, if I pull this cup, there's a reason why this cup is here. I'm like, oh, I got this cup because I want to drink some water. There's the only cup at the store. There's a reason why that's here. Once you start denying that, then you'll be bound to deny many other things. And that's the thing with, let's say, the Fitrah argument, or Ibn Taymiyyah's view, is that if you deny God, anybody who denies God, they are bound to fall into skepticism or contradictions in their own epistemological beliefs. And that's where, who was it? Michael Huemer, who I know is an atheist, he was debating Lance Bush, who denies morality, objective morality. And Michael Huemer pointed out that, philosophers simply deny everything. And there will be no other work, like if you go into science, engineering, or anything else, nothing would be accomplished if all the workers were philosophers, because they just deny everything. And that's kind of what the Fitrah argument is trying to push somebody back, saying, why are you denying God? And you'll be bound to find an epistemological, philosophical thing that they fall into, a skepticism. So this argument, I agree with you, this argument does works brilliantly.
Subhanallah. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. Wow, like mashallah, how I imagine it to be, it's going even better than that. So let's take something known as the Nomological Argument. Now, this argument can be phrased into argument from order, like because we are talking about the laws of nature themselves, not something that science can grasp. You're like, it can also be considered, or it is very similar to the argument from the applicability of mathematics formulated by William Lane Craig. Like there's some similarity there. So this kind of argument would be like the coherence and consistency of the laws of nature themselves. This is where I'm hinting at. So where do you think I can?
Are you saying, if I could maybe push, are you saying with this argument that the laws of nature, they're so consistent that it points to a God, or that our understanding of these laws or mathematical laws points to a God? You get the difference, what I'm trying to say here?
No.
Or one is like, let's say, ontological, like the laws of nature and math exist because God gave us those things and God put them into place. Or is it saying because we have came to the realization that math exists, that 2 + 2 is 4, that the laws of nature are so consistent, that points to about our understanding of those things? Is that which one are you trying to point?
Yeah, so I take it as a family, and I would consider both of them to be somewhere pointing to the same direction in some or the other way. So what I'm thinking of is in the sense that a very abductive version could be something like compared, for example, naturalism and let's say theism. You have these laws of nature that function in a coherent manner. There is no prediction there is no good prediction that comes from naturalism why there are laws. You might have to take it as a brute fact. Whereas theism, in a theistic worldview, you can expect laws of nature to be coherent and consistent, ordered in a manner. So the ordering of the laws themselves, in that sense, that is what I had right off the bat. That is what I thought.
Yeah. Then I would probably place it in B tier. I think that's a good argument. I was just trying to make sure what exactly it was, but I think that argument, once again, kind of like the argument from beauty, but in a more, let's say, obviously a more cold approach to the argument from beauty, but it's looking at how the laws work and everything in this universe, explaining it through naturalism, through the Big Bang and all the multiverse, doesn't really get to it as easily, as simple, and as consistent as one necessary being a God. I would put it on B because I think it does work logically, and you can also spin it in a way that can attract the masses as well.
Right. And one thing I find very interesting is that, many atheists, they try to use science to explain everything, but this argument is something that the whole of science is presupposed upon, which is this uniformity, these laws of nature, which you have to assume that they exist and they are uniform, and then only science can run. So this argument is actually addressing the whole fundamental foundation of science itself, which is why are there laws in the first place, which you cannot use science to explain because science is already presupposing it. And I think it was Paul Davies who came up with the paper that, got many atheists mad, as to, he was actually questioning that why are we taking them in the first place, these laws of nature themselves. And, so yeah, this is what I was hinting at. So
yeah, I think what's good with this, what's good with this argument too, is especially towards a scientific-minded individual, this argument works because you just point to some things that science in and of itself cannot describe. Like our memory being reliable. This is something that Joe Schmidt mentions too, that our memories are reliable, but there's no scientific paper showing that memories are reliable. Because in order to even do that paper, you have to already believe in our memories being reliable. In order to do any scientific papers, you have to believe in the laws of non-contradiction. Hence, I think that's especially for a scientifically minded individual, pointing that there is some stuff that science cannot explain, at least can take them away from the scientism view that they might take. So I think that's a good argument.
Okay, great. So now let's take argument from language. Now, argument from language is going to be very tough for me to explain which version I'm talking about, because there are many different versions of argument from language. But in very simple terms, like when we look at language itself and how human beings actually got to having language, which is a meaningful expression, first of all, transcends a materialistic understanding in some sense. And secondly, you cannot have even an evolutionary explanation for how did language emerge, because people struggle. And from a naturalistic perspective, how would people like human beings generate this kind of a thing, which it's like, I don't know how to phrase it nicely, but it is something that the Munchausen trilemma.
Yeah, I think I get what you're trying to say here. Like how would I phrase it? I think it's I forgot the analogy some people give, but what is the problem with, like, the good thing with this argument, I guess, or what it's trying to show is, we're all here in this world, that we have language, but not only language, but how is it that our concepts of even how to speak, subject, verb, even though there's different ways of phrasing those, we have those concepts in the back of mind. That's why I think Noam Chomsky and many others, linguists, they point to that all languages have an original starting point, has an original asal in it. And I think that's it's a very interesting, how is it that, all around the world, if just simply through evolution, we have constructed this perfect form of language that somehow is also universal. It has an original base to it. I actually like this argument. The only thing with me is that I haven't delved as deep into it, so I'm going to place it on B tier. But what I do like about this argument, I remember I did a video on Vosh, and I don't know if you saw that one, but Vosh was saying, this is a famous clip. He was debating this professor, and he's saying the person with water is H2O. Vosh said no, but in Mexico it's agua. And it was very I don't know, it was very funny, and he was being serious about it. But when you have these postmodernists trying to deny language, trying to deny that, language is all subjective, is all in our mind, we created language, then you can just simply point to, well, how is that we humans create such perfect languages, especially, let's say, Arabic, that all the base goes into 3 languages, dhahab, and then you have many other words that come out of there. It's hard to explain it simply through a postmodernist, realm view of the world. So I think it's powerful, and it also connects with the Quran. When Allah says, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, that Allah taught Adam the names of everything. So you can connect it back to the Quran as well, which my favorite arguments are the ones that can be connected back to the Quran and Sunnah.
Right, subhanallah. And I honestly believe that this is a line of arguments that people have not paid much attention on. I have like a two-part series on this argument where brother Jerry Coughlin and I, we look into so many different aspects, and there's so much of fascinating stuff. Like, you can use the argument from language to make a special case for Islam as well. You can make a case for for human origins. Like, it can in some sense help in that manner. It can help in some sense of making a case against naturalism or materialism. What's fascinating is that when it comes to language, like as you mentioned, many linguists themselves argue that how language has to be preloaded all at once. It cannot have a stepwise kind of growth. It's all or nothing kind of a thing. And another thing what is interesting is that brother Jerry Coughlin actually argues and explains how many linguists, leading researchers, explain how language is being degenerating. It does not evolve, it de-evolves. The more you go back in time, you have purer versions of use of language where it is more complex, not simpler. So the more we go back, even if, like, for example, you take Arabic itself, like, now Arabic that we use is very much simple compared to the ancient Arabic, even English. The same way, you take tribal languages and other languages, they are so complex that, like, sometimes it's just mind boggling. So that is one aspect. Another aspect is that, there is an aggregate problem as well, where language is an entire system where, like, you need a back and forth communication with people. So it's not that someone can just generate language and then, you start talking to others. Like, once Richard Dawkins had a debate, I think discussion with some bishop, and he said that, okay, I have to explain how language emerged. He said that I have to break all of my assumptions about gradualism and assume that it was a sudden mutation where everyone started, like, one person, his parents could not talk, like one person, I'm saying one,
and then he started talking. Yeah,
he started talking, and the bishop was like, okay, so who was he talking to? Like, how does it generate language, and then who does he talk to? So it makes no sense.
Why did the other person understand what he was saying? It makes no sense.
Exactly.
And I think just with this argument, because I was actually looking more into this argument in the philosophy of language, looking into it. I think that especially with a Muslim da'i, if they actually look at what linguistics say about language, about the universality of language, how it cannot be just simply through evolution, this argument can be very powerful. Because not only does it go, well, before we were talking, how is that we're even conversing with one another? How is it that we're discussing? And as you said, it's interesting that if we go back in time, language is more complex than it is now, but we're advancing. You would think it would be simpler to complex, but now it's actually complex to simpler. So especially with connecting to the Quran, yeah, this argument can easily also go up to an 18. Maybe I just haven't focused on it that much. I'm definitely going to watch the podcast series, but I would move it up to an 18 because you can connect it with the Quran.
Right.
Because you can connect it with the Quran. You can
have an upgrade.
yeah, mid conversation.
Got an upgrade. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
And I feel like if, especially us Muslims, because we have what the Quran states, that God taught Adam everything, then we can connect it back to the Quran, which Christianity and Judaism does not have in the same capacity as we do. Hence, showing a bridge between Islam and our religion actually provides this argument where the others do not, especially connecting with the Fitrah. So I agree with you. You convinced me. It's a strong argument, actually.
Yeah. And that there is two more interesting things that I can add related to this. One is that some linguists like Mark Baker use this argument to make a case for the soul as well, not just God's existence, because there's some aspect of language where the creative aspect of language used, they say, the creative aspect. This creativity of using language itself cannot be grounded in a materialistic sense, and you cannot find any place in the brain where you can say, okay, yeah, this is doing that job. And I mean, there's a lot to unpack, but yeah, I'm not going to do that. The second thing is that, in my research, I was going through one guy, very well known. Was he a linguist or anthropologist? I forgot. He did a long study on teaching chimpanzees language. And one chimpanzee he had, his name was, his or her, I don't know. Name was Nim Chimsky. He named it, I think
I've heard of it.
Yeah. So he tried to teach language to this chimpanzee, and took many years, and then he was like, no, not possible. And he, the whole project was a failure. But at the end of it, like one of his articles I was reading, he said that, in the end, he said that there's one fundamental difference between human beings and animals. And he says that human beings know that things have names, whereas animals, they don't know that things have names. So he himself admitted, he said, what Noam Chomsky is talking about, even fundamental to that is knowing that things have names. And if animals don't know that things have names, then they cannot learn language. And then this is, again, links back to what we understand in the Quran. So I found that really fascinating.
Oh, you really convinced me of this argument. I have to do more research on this. This is actually a fascinating argument. Like, honestly, I have to look. I think more days should actually focus on this. Since again, it links to the Quran, and there's so much actual research done on it, especially the Richard Dawkins debate, which was funny.
Right. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. Okay. One very popular one known as psychophysical harmony. Where would we place this?
You see? I would rank it as a B. Because I feel like this also connects a lot to the other ones on that list. And I feel like, once again, this argument can also, it's trying to show that if we were to put, let's say, this on a scale of believability, naturalism, and the belief in God, that this argument is trying to show that there's a slight more probabilistic factor of God being the one who set everything here than just simply naturalism. Which again, argument from beauty, even the design argument, are trying to show like, okay, maybe we can't find that contradiction, but really, especially with like the argument from beauty, design argument, language, and this put on a scale, it clearly favors the theistic conception of God over naturalism, over the multiverse, or whatever the case atheists want to explain. What do you think of this argument?
Yeah, I completely agree with you what you're saying. I think this argument helps when you already are building a case for God's existence, and then the cherry on the top where you use that to show that how that now this is also what naturalism can't explain, which is this psychophysical harmony. So I think before this argument, if you make the case for consciousness and being consciousness being immaterial, I think this strengthens the case, though you can formulate this argument from an epiphenomenological level as well. At time, in some versions of materialism can also have, like, you can build the argument within that as well. But if you first use the argument from consciousness, and if you are good at that, and then this would be a like cherry on top, like if consciousness exists, it's not material, it's something immaterial. And then the psychophysical harmony, it makes psychophysical harmony stronger by saying how there is this harmony between them in some sense.
I think the what you said about cherry on top is exactly why it's a good argument, and I would place it on B, because the other arguments, like say consciousness, even like the fine-tuning design argument, are doing more of the legwork. And this argument is like that little push that somebody might need, and that's like the strength of this argument. It's just that one tiny push. And you can ask the atheists, like, really, can naturalism explain this better than theism? And they're like, it kind of pushes them in an awkward position. So that's why I would rank it B.
Right. And recently I was going through one debate between Graham Oppy and Brian Cutter, and throughout the debate I was just saying, okay, let's see what Graham Oppy has to offer in terms of a naturalistic explanation for psychophysical.
And he didn't offer a good one.
Exactly. And most of the time I see Oppy, he's just going into the nuances, but what do you mean by this? No, I have this.
Yeah.
And I don't see anything productive there where, okay, yeah, you offer an alternative. Like, I don't see that. It's more about picking out this, I don't believe in this, or challenging some idea. I mean, yeah, I don't see, at least, okay, I'm not saying that he's completely not doing anything, but at least I find that whatever he has to offer, still I think theism trumps. It's more simple, unified, and comprehensive compared to whatever he has to offer.
Especially in that debate, I just found Graham Oppy, who's, anybody says Graham Oppy, he's one of the top atheist philosophers now. It was just, as you were saying, picking and being nitpicky. Well, what about this? What about that? And there was nothing given at the table. And if I was going to go like, well, I have atheism and there's nothing on the table. I have theism. I have a cake on the table. Why would I not take theism? At the end of the debate, I was like, I'd just rather take theism. Right. So I agree with you.
Okay, so now my question is, so beyond these four arguments, is there any argument that you would put on the D category?
Or on the D category? Okay,
yeah,
I would put one argument. I would put, and this is a very controversial one. If you're saying the moral argument, like the moral ontological argument, I would probably place on the D.
Oh, wow.
But let me explain why. I actually did a recent video. I don't know if you saw it. Can atheists be moral?
I saw it.
And and the and me personally, the reason why I don't like the moral ontological argument is, as many atheists say too, that okay, we have the atheists have virtue theory ethics, Kant's deontological ethics. They have many systems of trying to get to the objective truth. And just so everyone knows, the moral ontological argument is from more popularized by William Lane Craig, that says that if there are no objective truths, God exists. There are objective truths, therefore God exists. But the problem with this argument is I view that goes against the Fitrah. Because as Ibn Taymiyyah says, our conceptions of me helping somebody, not causing harm, putting more good in the world than evil is fitri. It comes in our intuition, our fitrah. We don't have to, or a non-Muslim does not have to, I don't know, I don't think goodness is good unless I found it in the Quran. We know, and this is what Allah says about beer, khamr. فَيَسَأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ. When the first ayah of beer comes, what does Allah state? Allah doesn't simply state it's haram. He says, فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ. There's a lot of badness within it. Allah is using the word badness because it's hitting at our intuition, at our fitrah. And hence, stating that we have to point to the Quran or the Bible, let's say, as many Christians say, in order to find what's objectively moral is hard. I don't have that view. I have the view, as many etherists claim, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what He commands is good because they are good. Some school of thoughts of the Aqidah, they say, what is good is simply what God commands is good. Oh, is it arbitrary? Yeah, there's no wisdom behind it. And I don't take that view. I think everything Allah puts out, there's a greater wisdom for it. And hence, I take the view that if this was the moral ontological argument, it would be D. If it was the moral epistemic argument, I would put it into A. And the moral epistemic is, the moral epistemic is simply stating that there are these concepts of morality, whether objective or subjective, so it can work on both ways. But why is it that, if, for instance, I use my video, even to an emotivist like Alex O'Connor, if somebody were to tell him or anybody here, that they aborted their child in the 8th month, you would feel fundamentally different than if somebody said, I aborted my child in the 2nd week. There's a fundamental difference of how we react to those two things. So even if you deny objective morality, why is it that we even have these emotions of morality, these specific understandings of morality, these specific feelings? And my argument is the only way to explain it is if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if a God, the necessary being, put within us this concept of the fitrah, these concepts of morality, trying to guide us to the right path. I know I said a lot, but what do you think about these arguments?
Yeah. So I'll first start with my view on. So let's consider this moral argument to be the epistemological one. And you said A, right?
Not A.
Okay. So I believe the moral epistemological argument is very strong. Many philosophers themselves admit. And as you mentioned that, how we have grounding for this because we have the concept of the fitrah, whereas atheists, they fail. And then trying to see how they fail is also very interesting, where various things that show how they have a problem of grounding them. One I can think of is this whole literature on evolutionary debunking of moral knowledge, if you are aware of this, which is very interesting.
I think this was from Plantinga, or I think he did an argument like, I don't know if it was him or somebody else.
Yeah. There's a lot of literature on it. I think many people have formulated different versions, and there are new versions coming in, and they've explained how there are 3 different kinds of debunking. If you try to okay, let me share something else. 1 second. Yeah. So evolutionary debunking of moral knowledge can be divided into 3 different parts. All 3 provide some form of debunking to moral knowledge. Now I won't go long in explaining each one, but the point is that in some sense trying just using evolution to ground your moral knowledge and naturalism. If you have evolution and naturalism, then you are under skepticism about your moral knowledge. So I think this, along with the Fitrah, makes the epistemological and moral argument very strong. And this is also something unique that Islam has to offer, which makes it more interesting.
Exactly. That's why I use
now
epistemic argument more than ontological, because it's specific. It's more connected to Islam than any other religion. But continue.
Right. Yeah. So that's the epistemic one, and I completely agree that it is more stronger than the ontological. But I would still beg to differ a bit on the moral ontological argument. At least if I was rating, I would not be putting it on the D category. My placement would be on the C or the B category, and I have something to argue about it. So let's say how William Lane Craig formulates a deductive version, and it's very problematic. I completely agree, because he has the burden of going through all different possibilities of secular morality and debunk all of them. But some at least argue that, okay, not a deductive version, but an abductive version formulated in a different way can still save the moral ontological argument. And I'm very sympathetic to that idea. And why? I'll explain why. Because let's say if you're trying to ontologically ground morality, you have to stop at one point. Like all explanation has to stop at one point. So you can either formulate the argument in this way that, okay, if morality has to stop in an impersonal explanation or a personal, finally it has to stop at something personal or something impersonal. Let's say something impersonal. Okay, let's say axiarchism or some kind of ism that's there. Okay, you are grounding objective morality in some sense, but the issue with that is that, okay, when we try to look the full picture of objective morality, so objective morality can be just like the skeleton, but there's a lot more related to it, like moral guilt, moral accountability, and those intuitions that we have along with it. They sometimes point to, they makes more sense if ultimately morality terminates in a personal explanation rather than an impersonal explanation. Let's say moral accountability makes more sense in front of a judge than a impersonal law that's out there. So like, for example, if you do something wrong and you feel that guilt, there is no law that makes you feel guilt about that law if the law is just ultimately impersonal. Like I don't feel guilt, let's say, or I don't feel shame in front of natural selection. I don't feel shame in front of any law. So this may be at least some argue that trying to account for the full moral picture and moral hope as well, that if you make an abductive version to say that if the binding nature of morality, the kind of normative aspect of objective morality can be better explained under theism, because if you are talking about something binding, that I ought to do this and this is a moral obligation, just an impersonal law compared to a theistic understanding where it is a personal where God has given you this obligation to do something, it better accounts for our intuitions and our understanding of how we see morality. It fits better in some sense. So in that sense, you can still argue for a moral ontological argument for God's existence, because God, under a theistic explanation, it fits better in some sense. Yeah, so that's my take on it.
I think and I've read more on the abductive kind of sense of the argument. That is stronger than the William Lane Craig approach one. Definitely stronger. My only, how would I say, contention, because these other arguments, you can kind of push easier towards God than the more ontological, simply because, let's look at objective, truth, like 2 + 2 is 4, the laws of non-contradiction. We don't have to, let's say, the laws of non-contradiction, it wasn't like what the conjugates cannot exist was at one point not there and then it was there. That's an explanation of reality. So objective truth is sometimes like 2 + 2 is 4 is an explanation of when you have two things, you add them together, you get 4. Hence, that's kind of the way that objective morality, a lot of atheists take too, that we have objective morality. It's an explanation of reality, of the truth. Hence, when you're trying to take it in that approach, that God put it down, and I understand the value, and I really look at it, and the abductive one is stronger than William Lane Craig's one. All my contention is the same thing as objective truth, like 2 + 2 is 4, or there cannot be any contradictions, the laws of identity and stuff like that. It isn't because they did not exist and then they did exist at one time. It is an explanation of reality, hence why they are objective. Same thing an atheist could say for morality, but I do value the one that you were explaining much more than the William Lane Craig one. So that your explanation is better, and many others have tried to argue it in that way as well.
Right. So what I saw was that at least this trying to ground morality in this kind of personal explanation, it's not like a knockdown argument, but at least from an abductive point of view, it still tries to explain if we take
leans it towards
morality. Yeah. So, but then all of our everything related to our moral perception, it provides a better explanation. It fits better in some sense compared to any other view which is impersonal, which is secular in nature. So that's not a very powerful argument, but at least it does not consider. It's not like when atheists say that, okay, you cannot formulate an objective moral argument, it fails in all possible ways. So we can say no, maybe a weaker version still exists, and you can still ground objective morality, and that can, in some sense, make a case for God's existence. And at least from a cumulative perspective, if we keep all of the arguments together in cumulative perspective, it still accounts better in some sense.
Yeah, it definitely adds more weight towards the theist side than the naturalist side.
Right.
So it does push it more. The abductive one is better. So the abductive one I would rank it higher, but simply the formulation from William Lane Craig and many other I would put it in the deep. I'm very harsh on that one.
Pretty controversial. I think even atheists are starting to abandon it. Anyway, so let's move on to the next one. Let's take Nomological Harmony. Nomological Harmony, where do you want to place it?
It's kind of like that. Yeah, I would place it on B. Or actually, C or B. I don't know. I'm not even decided. But we can just leave it there. I think it's a good argument, but it's, again, one of those arguments that you have to have other stronger arguments. And then this is more of the, like the little cherry on top, or, when you have that cookie with a little sprinkle of salt on top, like this adds a little flavor, but I'm not starting with this argument, in my opinion. My point? Yeah, like that's the only problem. I can't start with this. Like, it's more like you get the atheist all the way there. It's like, what about this? And that can lean them towards a belief in God, but it's not a starting point. But that's my take on it.
Yeah, I agree. And then if you can unpack the argument a bit, so people can understand what are we talking about.
Well, it's you can kind of see it in, like, how do I say, like the beauty argument, or the other argument is that there's so much harmony, like in the body and the world and everything, so much that obviously it leans more towards the belief in God than naturalism. If I'm getting the argument right. And again, it's more of a cherry on top rather than a beginning argument. Because again, if you start with this argument, the atheist can say, "Oh, there's no harmony except the problem of evil. Look how corrupt the world is. And our bodies have issues too, and we have, like, they say, wisdom teeth." Sometimes I've heard atheists point to wisdom teeth. I mean, I think that's a stupid argument, but still, that, oh, see, we have some stuff that we don't need anymore, therefore it's not harmonious. But that's my view on it.
Yeah, and okay, so we have Nomological Harmony here. Now, is there any argument that you think we could have added? Let me know.
Oh, a good argument that we could have added. I have to think. Let me think. We have the Kalam Cosmological Argument for Reason. There's one argument that Joshua Rasmussen, actually there's two arguments that Joshua Rasmussen makes. I don't know if you've read this paper. There's one that he's drawing a contradiction towards the belief in atheism. Have you actually read this one?
Yeah.
Or no?
Yeah. I've skimmed through it.
Yeah, and that argument I like, an argument from necessary knowledge. Those two arguments kind of connect to one another. But essentially the argument goes as follows: that when it comes to premises, we have truth. Premises is, all men are mortal. We have that as a premise. There are contingent premises, like, Donald Trump is the president of the United States. And then we have necessary knowledge or necessary premises, like, 2 + 2 is 4. That by definition, the premises like 2 and 2 leads to the conclusion 4 is tautological, and so on and so forth. And how is it that we have these necessary knowledge? That's kind of the argument that Jake made when debating Aaron Raw. That in order to have these necessary knowledge, there has to be a necessary mind to have those propositions exist. While it can get a little bit complicated, that argument is strong, and Joshua Rasmussen's version showing that leads to a contradiction in atheism, I think it is a strong argument. I don't know what you think of those arguments, though.
No, I find them to be very strong. I was going to get to this argument as well, like how Jake was calling it argument from throughput, if I'm not mistaken, and some people call it from necessary abstracta to necessary concreta. I think version. Right. So I find them very powerful. The only issue is, if you're talking to a normal man walking down the street, he might not know what is.
They're not going to understand.
But then I find them to be very powerful. So where would you?
When you're talking, when you're talking, like, okay, if you're talking, let's say, to an academic, somebody who understands, I would place it like high, like probably A, B. If you're talking to a layman, probably C, because they just won't understand what's going on. What do you mean that propositions are mental things and you have to have a necessary mind? They get lost and they kind of like zone out. But what I liked about this argument, especially Joshua Rasmussen's view, is that you're showing a contradiction with atheism. And many times we're trying to show that God exists. There aren't that many arguments trying to show a contradiction with atheism. That's why when he's discussing consciousness, when he's discussing this argument, he's showing that any other belief leads to contradiction except the belief in God. That's why those arguments really work too. That's my take.
Okay. So if I'm not mistaken, the contradiction and the necessary knowledge, you're combining both of them in one argument, right? Or are you considering them two different arguments?
Well, if you make that argument, the necessary knowledge one, there has to be a necessary mind to uphold those information, then it can lead to a contradiction with atheism if they simply reject the necessary being. If they reject the necessary, you get because if we have premises and those are mental like ideas, all men are mortal, all A's are M, for instance. We understand that as objectively true because we can also have that premise in our mind. Now, when it has a necessary knowledge, it has to have a necessary mind, a personal, something that is necessary and has a mind, has an intellect in order to have that premise as well. If you get what I'm trying to say here. And that's how he kind of draws the contradiction, that if you deny necessary existence, then how can you have necessary knowledge? Unless you want to take, the pill and deny necessary knowledge, everything is as, subjective. But if you take it that there are objective truths, then it could lead to a contradiction with atheism. What do you think of these arguments?
I find them to be very powerful. In fact, a few months back, I was doing some research on these arguments, and I worked on a version of this argument, not for making a case for God's existence, but making a case for monotheism. So, inshallah, I'm gonna an article is gonna come on this subject. Yeah. So I really love these arguments. That there's one more. If you read 24 or so arguments for God's existence, the first chapter by Giuliano Keller again argues something very similar to this. Where again it tries to say it is a proposition supernaturalized, like some propositions have to be grounded in a mind in some sense. Yeah. So now your final take on where would you place this argument?
Overall, I would place it in B. The only issue with that argument is that it could be too complicated. But in terms of an academic field, it can be powerful. That's why Joshua Rasmussen's paper was actually a very good paper. But it can just be complicated for the general masses, in my opinion.
Agreed. Okay. So now let's move on to fine tuning. Yeah. Where would you place fine tuning?
For me, honestly, these fine tuning and contingency, I would both place on S.
Oh, I completely agree, bro. Like fine tuning deserves to be on the S category. So
I know
why would you
there's a lot of people. Yeah, I know there's a lot of people who kind of, a jab at the fine tuning, but I remember Joe Schmidt, Alex O'Connor doing a video, and who was it? Joe Foley, Unsolicited Advice, doing these rankings, and they all found the fine tuning very and it is, convincing. I was reading a paper for one of my classes in my master's, and the fine tuning of the argument is like, okay, let's say you have, a revolver. You're gonna play Russian roulette. You put the little bullet in, you just spin it randomly. You're gonna shoot a target 200 meters away, blindfolded, and you somehow shoot right in the middle 100 times in a row. That's impossible unless you're a trained marksman who knows where you're placing the bullet and everything else. That's the same thing with the fine tuning. How is it that we are just so finely tuned to life that we just are able to live here? Sean Carroll, he tried arguing for the multiverse to explain this. But again, it still pushes the question back even further. How is a multiverse? How did it come that we are so finely tuned, even through the multiverse? So this argument, I remember I was talking to an atheist, and I used this argument. And I said to him, like really, let's look at how finely tuned the universe is. Are you really telling me it's just a randomness from the Big Bang? And he kind of like stood there going like, like he couldn't really answer, because it's also an emotional argument. It works both ways. So I really like this argument.
Yeah, I honestly love this argument, and the more I see, the more academia is getting convinced and appreciating the argument more and more these days. When it comes to the multiverse, I think so there are so many objections that come in. Like right off the bat, I remember I had a discussion with Miles Kidono, who is working heavily on the fine tuning argument. When it comes to the multiverse, you have the Bosman-Brains objection, the inverse Gamler's fallacy, etc., which again cannot account for fine tuning. But if you take fine tuning for what it is, I think the objection that is coming from academia this time is when you try to formulate in a Bayesian manner. There's some technical issues that come in, and I've seen Luke Barnes and Brian Cutter and many others explain that these technical details that come in with the Bayesian formulations would even occur when you have, let's say an awesome theistic evidence, like even if the stars align.
If the star says the first 16 verse of Luke or whatever it was. I saw that video.
Yeah. So again, even if there is some technical issues with the Bayesian formulation, that issue is with the technical issue. The argument itself is quite robust, and those kind of objections, which generally are becoming very common, they don't stand, because only if their objection is specific to the fine tuning argument and don't apply to any kind of awesome theistic evidence, is when their objection would be in some sense accepted to be legitimate, or else there's no specific objection against the fine tuning argument. At least what I have seen, I haven't found any very good objection. What I found is all these technical issues with the this but what about this?
It's just technical issues, but they don't actually give here's a better solution to it, because they just gave up on that. There's like, there's a technical issue. And even that argument about, the awesome theological, I forgot exactly what the name was. I remember I read the paper too. And it's like, imagine in the night sky, you see the first, you see all of Surah Al-Fatiha, and if the argument that you're making against the fine tuning goes against is that, like, clearly you're making a too strong of an argument that's actually not good. There's kind of, I remember when reading David Hume, and he said, one of the characters in the book he wrote was saying, what if you just heard God in the sky say your name and stuff like that? And Hume was the author, basically was saying, like, then I would just assume that the tree fell and it made that noise. And like, if you're going to doubt that much, then like, just be a skeptic. There's no point in believing in anything.
Exactly. Okay, so now let's move on to the final one, which is the contingency argument.
S,
S, if I'm not mistaken.
right away. No thinking about it, S tier.
Okay. And Alhamdulillah, you also gave for a very brief explanation of what the argument is in the initial part of the video. So now my question would be is, let's take all of the S ones and let's say where the closest to S would be the best amongst these four. So how would you rank these four now that this is what you got to do? Amongst
Okay,
these
so for
four
me, it
which
would
are in
be,
S category, the best is
yeah, it would go in,
best to the least. Yeah.
for me, it would go Fitrah, contingency, fine tuning, and consciousness.
Okay.
Fitrah, contingency, fine tuning, and consciousness.
Yeah, looks
Because
good.
For me, fine tuning, you can kind of like wiggle in the consciousness argument as well. So you can connect them in a couple of ways. So that's why, but they're all S tier in my opinion.
Subhanallah. So here we have, mashallah, beautiful formulation here with the top tiers. Any argument that I think we could have added? What do you think about Pascal's wager?
Pascal's wager. That's an interesting one, right? It doesn't do that much convincing, I found. But I don't know, maybe from your experience it has, but maybe because I'm more trying to deal with academic arguments, I don't favor that argument. Because again, you're telling somebody like, okay, well, let's say you have a Muslim who has doubts, or a Muslim who left Islam, or an atheist. So, well, you better believe in God because let's say it's true, they can go to hell. It's like, okay, then which God? Like, Christianity, Islam. It's still not like, how can I phrase this? If I make the contingency argument or the Fitrah argument, I can point, or let's say even the moral argument, conscious argument, I can say, well, when they ask the question, well, which God? I'll say the only God that makes sense with the contingency argument is Allah. Because let's look at the Trinity, right? The Trinity is a contradiction. The Son is begotten, hence he's dependent. That's why, who was the Christian? I'm blanking on his name. Christian philosopher. I'm blanking on his name. He said that God is dependent. He gave up the necessary, that God is necessary. Because God is Richard Swinburne. Yeah, that's exactly. Because if God is begotten, then he has to be contingent. There's an explanation for how Jesus got here. That's why those arguments simply work for the Islamic God. But when you get to Pascal's wager, it's like, okay, there's so many gods. There's the Christian, Judaism, Islam. So I don't particularly use it. I've never found it convincing, personally. What about you?
Would this be in the D category for you, or even worse?
I don't know, but D, yeah, for this list, D, I would not use it.
Okay, for me, I think only one place where Pascal's wager can be useful is at times where a person is going through a lot of waswas, and if in some way you have convinced him that Islam is true, but he's not able to make that leap, and now he cannot make that leap because he's just thinking too much. He has many waswas, and then you just tell him that the alternative is going to be more risky for you, and you have to choose.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So I think only in this in these positions, maybe Pascal wager is helpful. Where you've already formulated Islam is true, you've already formulated all of this, but then you just have to make that jump now. For that person has to make that jump, and this can help say to be the springboard for the jump in some sense. So apart from that, I don't think it's useful.
I would agree with you that if you're talking to a Muslim who, generally believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but there comes a doubt, then, even us, when sometimes we need to read the verses of Jannah, but we also need to read the verse of Jahannam and the hadiths that describe it in order to, scare us to, okay, now I actually have to do work and, have to, have my good intentions when doing acts for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But outside of that very specific category, I wouldn't use this against an atheist, in my opinion. So I agree with you.
Makes sense. So another idea comes to my mind is maybe inshallah in future we can plan on doing a top tier list for arguments for Islam. Maybe that would be really interesting. Someday,
That would be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm 100% down for that because there's the second step. How do you know it's got Allah? And we have the, but that would be great.
Right. Inshallah. So any
Inshallah.
other argument does not come to my mind. One thing, another, not particularly an argument for God's existence, but some pragmatic ways of proving theism over naturalism some people use is like making how if you want meaningful happiness, if you want objective meaning, objective purpose, then you got to go with theism. If you want to, in some sense, make sense of hope, then you got to go with theism, because theism can help you have ultimate hope, ultimate meaning, ultimate purpose. So your normal functioning as a human being, because these are the things we strive for, in some sense, having objective meaning, objective purpose, and this helps people sometimes to choose theism over naturalism. How would you rate this? This would be the last one, inshallah, for tonight.
Yeah, I actually do find that argument attractive because especially when you have a Muslim who has doubts or an atheist on the edge, you're bringing them to, so like, okay, you have atheism. Your life is meaningless. Like at the end of the day, you're going to die 6 feet under. There's no fundamental difference between, let's say, you and a serial killer. Like you're both going to go 6 feet under. And what was the point of being good and doing all these things? But then you have theism that, okay, your life must have sucked. And this was something that, who was it? A comedian who was an atheist. He was trying to argue that like, oh, it's actually beautiful when you think that this is your only chance in life and you try your best to make it. There's no afterlife. And I'm like, that's only good if you're like a super rich white man. Majority of people in history do not have that privilege to go like, yes, I only have one life and it's so beautiful. But Islam gives you the opportunity. And that's something of the story of Zayd ibn Amr, where before Islam came, he was always looking for the truth, always looking for the truth. He, they tell him, go to like the Sham. He goes to Sham and say, oh, the prophet's going to come in your land. Halfway through, a bunch of highway bandits come and kill him. If you were to look at his life from an atheistic, paradigm, a waste of life. He didn't accomplish anything technically. But then comes hadith from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he will be risen as a one-man ummah, one-man nation. And it gave his worthless life meaning that you would never have in atheism. So I would easily give that A or B, especially if you're talking to somebody who has doubts. It really pushes them on the edge to Islam.
Subhanallah, that was beautiful. Alhamdulillah. So I think with this we can end this section of our reviewing different arguments. I completely like more than like I could have imagined. I enjoyed it. Alhamdulillah.
I really liked it. Yeah.
So inshallah, we'll have this again, inshallah, with the specific arguments for Islam soon, inshallah, someday.
Inshallah.
And yeah. Okay, so we will end this section and inshallah move into the next section.